Rain was pouring hard on that lonely highway when a beat-up semi rolled to a stop, steam hissing from its engine. Most folks would have just kept driving, but not Sarah, the struggling small-town mechanic. She pulled over, drenched to the bone, and with nothing but her rusty toolbox, she worked until her hands bled, getting that trucker back on the road. When he tried to pay, she shook her head. "You don't owe me a thing." What Sarah didn't know was who that man really was, or that weeks later, the roar of a flatbed trailer pulling up to her little garage would change her life forever. If you drove past the 2-bay cinder-block garage on the edge of town, you wouldn't have thought much of it. The hand-painted sign read Sarah's Diesel and Repair in fading red, the S on Sarah's a bit crooked like a chipped tooth. The gravel lot puddled when it rained, the office door stuck in the summer. But inside, the air smelled like old oil and warm metal, an honest smell. And the woman who ran the place treated engines the way some folks treat cherished family, patient, attentive, stubbornly loyal. Sarah Rose Whitaker was 34 and already carried the posture of someone who'd lifted too much, worried too long, and slept too little. She had sun-browned arms, scar knuckles, and a farmer's tan that refused to leave. Her hair, dark chestnut usually twisted up under a greasy ball cap, escaped in curls when the heat climbed. There was a tiny nick on her right cheekbone from a slipping wrench, and a crescent burn near her wrist from a stubborn exhaust manifold. She wore those marks like medals. They told the story of years. She'd grown up a half-mile down a dirt road, where her father kept a barn full of broken things that other folks had given up on. Tractors that hadn't breathed in decades, an old Detroit diesel that coughed like a smoker, a square-body Chevy with more rust than paint. "Machines are just puzzles," her dad used to say, sliding a socket onto a ratchet. "Treat 'em with respect, and they'll tell you what they need." He'd passed before his hair went fully gray, leaving Sarah a lot of grief and a little money, just enough to buy the cinder-block box that became her world. It wasn't glamorous. Most months, breaking even felt like a victory. Her customers were farmers with cracked hands and truckers who spoke in miles, hours, and coffee. She'd patch a coolant hose for a guy hauling hay, rebuild an alternator that should have been replaced, and charge less than she ought to. Sometimes she took payment in barter, a freezer full of pork, a stack of firewood, a worn-out drill press that still ran straight. And when cash ran low, she made dinner out of toast and eggs and worked late, just so the drone of the impact gun kept her from counting bills in her head. She loved the work, truly. The first cough of an engine coming back to life made her chest lift every time. She knew the temperament of a Cummins by the knock, could tell a failing injector by the way a Freightliner idled like it was chewing gravel. She kept a notebook of torque specs, old school, pages stained with grease. She talked to parts suppliers like they were family, because in a way they were. They were the difference between Tuesday and a shut-off notice. Still, pride alone didn't keep the lights on. The town had grown up in odd directions. New subdivisions, chain stores, a gleaming auto complex on the hill with neon signage and free espresso for waiting customers. Knox Auto and Performance, all glass and chrome, the kind of place that advertised with drone footage, shiny bays, white floors, young techs in embroidered polos. Sarah didn't hate them. She didn't have time for hate. But she felt the squeeze. Folks who'd sent their boy over to sweep her floor for pocket money were now taking their pickups to the hill because it looked like the future. The bank called more often. "We just need to verify a few items," they'd say, cheerful. She'd put them on hold, wipe her hands, breathe. The rent on her parts storage went up. The compressor wheezed when temperatures dropped. The shop cat, Diesel, lost a fight with something meaner, and came home with one ear ragged and proud. There were moments when the loneliness of it pressed on her ribs, when a bolt wouldn't budge and she had no one to hold the other side. When she signed for deliveries with black crescents under her nails and saw the delivery guy glance at her name tag like he expected a Sam or Steve. When an older customer asked, "Is the mechanic here?" And she had to smile and say, "I am," and wait for the flicker of surprise to pass. She wasn't angry, just tired of proving it, again and again, with good work and time. but she had a way of keeping her chin level even when the hours wore thin. Every morning she rolled up the bay door and let the day in. She'd set a mug of coffee on the fender of whatever sat in Bay 1, F-250, Peterbilt, old Farmall tractor, and listen. The tick of cooling metal, the distant whine of the new place's tire balancer, the radio in her office muttering about weather. She'd whisper to the job like it was a prayer. "We're gonna figure you out." On Thursdays, Mrs. Alvarez from the diner sent over a plate. Biscuits, sausage gravy, a pancake the size of a hubcap. "You helped my Miguel that time," she'd say, wagging a plastic fork. "No charge means we feed you." On Saturdays, a retired welder named Hollis stopped by to talk nonsense and sharpen her chisels by hand, slow and satisfied. The world wasn't just neon and glass. It still kept some warm corners. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed on those long afternoons when the light went gold and the dust lit up like confetti, was how close she was to the first domino. How one act, small and ordinary in her mind, would reach farther than any invoice she'd ever written. That day would start like this. An early phone call she almost ignored, a weather report muttering about storms, and a trucker's voice on the other end of the line saying, "Ma'am, I'm on County Road 12 and I think my engine just died." She'd wipe her hands, look at the unpaid bills, feel the tug of the decent thing. She'd grab her toolbox anyway. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, the morning was quiet, and the only sound in the shop was the steady chuck-chuck-chuck of a worn-out air ratchet and the clink of a 10mm socket settling back into its tray. Sarah set her mug down and glanced at the crooked S on her sign through the open bay. It made her grin in spite of everything. She turned back to the truck in Bay 1 and tightened one last bolt, the kind of torque you feel in your forearm bones. The office bell chimed. A shadow fell across the doorway, confident, crisp, and out of place among the smudged walls and pegboard. She recognized that cologne before she looked up, the one they bottled to smell expensive. A smile like a showroom brochure followed it in. "Morning," said the man from the hill, sleeves rolled, watch gleaming. "We need to talk about your little operation." The wrench in her hand felt heavier than it should have. She wiped her palm, lifted her chin, and met his eyes. Out in the gravel, a black pickup idled, hazard lights blinking like a warning. What he was about to say would cut deeper than overdue notices ever could. And before noon, the whole town would be talking. The man who stepped into Sarah's garage didn't look like someone who'd ever held a wrench in his life. His hands were clean, manicured, his shirt ironed crisp. Even his boots looked like they'd been bought for style, not for work. Sarah knew him well enough. Kyle Knox, the son of the man who ran Knox Auto and Performance, the flashy new shop up on the hill. She'd seen him in town, leaning on his shiny truck, laughing loud, always surrounded by people who seemed to nod when he spoke, like every word was worth something. He strolled across the concrete floor like he owned it. His eyes scanned the cluttered benches, the grease-stained rags, the battered toolbox with stickers curling at the edges. He smirked. "Quite the setup you've got here," he said, his voice dripping sarcasm. "Charming. Real vintage." Sarah didn't flinch. She kept her rag in hand, wiping the grease from her fingers, steady as always. "Can I help you with something, Kyle?" "You can," he said, stepping closer. "You can stop pretending this shack is a real garage." He gestured around, eyes narrowed. "Because let's be honest, this isn't a business. This is a hobby shop with a leaky roof." Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd heard plenty of dismissive comments before. But there was something about the way he said it, as if he enjoyed the sting that dug under her skin. She tried to keep her voice level. "I fix trucks. That's what matters." Kyle chuckled, shaking his head. "You fix trucks?" "Sarah, come on. You think anyone serious is going to bring their rig here when they could go up to Knox Auto? We've got diagnostics you've never even heard of. Heated waiting rooms. Customers don't want grease stains and cats running around." He glanced toward Diesel, who was curled up on a stool, one ear ragged. "They want quality and professionalism, not some—" He paused, his smirk turning cruel. "Not some woman playing mechanic in Daddy's old coveralls." That hit harder than she wanted it to. She felt the words like grit in her teeth. Still, she forced herself to meet his gaze. "My work speaks for itself." "Does it?" Kyle leaned against the hood of the truck she'd been fixing, leaving fingerprints on the paint. "Because word around town is you barely keep the lights on. One bad month and poof, this place folds. You know what happens then?" He tapped the hood, each knock deliberate. "We buy it, cheap, tear it down, put up something respectable." Sarah's chest burned hot, but she swallowed it back. "If you came here just to threaten me, you can see yourself out." Kyle laughed, sharp and echoing in the garage. "Threaten? No, Sarah. I'm giving you a reality check. You're holding on to a dream that died with your old man. This business? It's a joke, and everyone knows it." She wanted to snap back, to tell him that every bolt she'd turned, every engine she'd brought back to life, meant more than his showroom ever would. But her throat was tight, and before she could find words, a customer walked in. A farmer she knew well, Mr. Jacobs, cap in hand. He paused, caught between them, his eyes darting from Kyle's polished grin to Sarah's clenched jaw. Kyle seized the moment. He straightened, projecting his voice so Jacobs could hear. "Listen, Mr. Jacobs, I'll tell you what. If you're serious about keeping your truck on the road, you should come up to Knox Auto. We'll do it right. Guaranteed. You don't want to risk your livelihood on this." He waved dismissively at Sarah's entire shop. Jacobs shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I've been coming here a long time. Sarah's always done right by me." Kyle's smile didn't falter. Sure, but times change. Technology changes. You don't want to get left behind." Sarah felt her face flush. The humiliation wasn't just in Kyle's words. It was in the way Jacobs looked torn, caught in the middle. In the way Diesel lifted his head and meowed softly, like even the cat knew the air had turned heavy. Kyle walked toward the door, tossing the final dagger over his shoulder. "Don't take it personally, Sarah. Some people just aren't cut out for this business. You're better off closing up before you embarrass yourself any further." The office bell jingled as he left, his black pickup roaring out of the lot like a dare. Sarah stood frozen, rag clenched tight in her fist, Jacobs shuffling awkwardly near the doorway. She forced a small smile for him, masking the sting. "Don't worry, Mr. Jacobs. I'll have your truck ready by tomorrow." But when the door shut behind him and the garage was quiet again, she leaned against the workbench and let out a long, shaky breath. The words echoed in her head. Not cut out for this business. Embarrass yourself. She told herself it didn't matter, that she'd been underestimated before. But Kyle's voice had a way of digging deep, of sticking in the places you don't want it to. And as the storm clouds gathered outside, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get harder. Much harder. Because humiliation has a way of planting roots. And this was just the beginning. The storm came in heavy that night, clouds rolling low and mean, the kind that made the highway lights blur and the air taste like iron. Sarah had just closed the garage, her shoulders aching from a 12-hour day, when her phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. She almost let it ring, but something in her gut told her to pick up. "Sarah's Diesel in repair," she said, voice hoarse. A man's voice, rough, tired. "Ma'am, I'm out on County Road 12, near mile marker 18. My rig just quit on me. Won't start, not even a cough. It's pouring buckets and I don't know who else to call." Sarah looked at the stack of unpaid bills on the desk, the leak dripping into the corner bucket, the fatigue pulling at her bones. She almost said no. But then she heard the edge in his voice. Not arrogance, not impatience, but worry. A working man stuck in the rain. "Stay put," she said. "I'll come to you." By the time she reached him, the rain had turned the road into a silver sheet, wipers slapping uselessly at the windshield. Headlights caught the silhouette of a semi pulled half into the ditch, hazard lights blinking weakly. Steam hissed from the hood. She pulled up behind it, grabbed her rusty red toolbox from the back seat, and stepped into the storm. The water soaked her cap instantly, plastered her hair to her face, but she didn't slow. The trucker climbed down from his cab, a tall man in a soaked flannel shirt, beard streaked with gray, eyes tired but kind. He looked embarrassed. Sorry to drag you out in this, I just didn't know who else. Sarah cut him off with a small smile. Engines don't wait for perfect timing. Let's see what we've got. The hood creaked open, and steam rolled into the rain. Sarah leaned in, flashlight in hand, water dripping off her nose onto the belts and pulleys. The smell hit her first, burnt coolant, diesel, and something sharper. She started working by instinct. Fuel lines, injectors, alternator. The truck was old, older than most still running freight. The wiring looked like a rat's nest patched over a dozen times. The engine block itself bore scars of long miles and harder fixes. This thing's been through a war, she muttered. The trucker gave a sheepish chuckle. She's all I got. Sarah's hands moved quick, her sockets slipping into place, her mind ticking through possibilities. Rain ran down her arms into her sleeves. At one point, a wrench slipped and cut her knuckle, but she didn't stop. Her world shrank to the stubborn bolts, the hiss of the storm, the steady hum of a man watching silently behind her. An hour passed. Then 2. She crawled under the cab, lying in mud, cursing at stripped threads. She rerouted a coolant hose with duct tape and prayer, tightened clamps until her fingers ached, and improvised a gasket out of rubber she cut with her pocket knife. By the 3rd hour, she'd rebuilt enough to risk it. She slammed the hood down, wiped her hands on her jeans, and nodded at the trucker. Try her now. He climbed into the cab, turned the key. The engine coughed, wheezed, and then roared to life. Exhaust poured black into the rain, but it ran. The man leaned out of the window, disbelief written across his face. You did it! Sarah just smiled, pushing wet hair out of her eyes. She'll get you home, but you'll need a real rebuild soon. The trucker jumped down, reaching for his wallet. How much do I owe you? Sarah shook her head, stepping back. Nothing. He blinked. Nothing? Lady, you just saved me. At least let me... No. Her tone was firm but not unkind. You've got miles to go, and you don't look like a man swimming in spare cash. Call it neighborly. The trucker studied her for a long moment, rain dripping from his beard. There was a weight in his eyes, something he wasn't saying. Then he nodded slowly, a small smile breaking through. You've got no idea what this means to me. Sarah shrugged, hefting her toolbox. Just get her home safe. She turned back to her pickup, boots squelching in the mud. But behind her, the man called out over the storm. I won't forget this. You hear me? I won't forget. She waved without turning, but the words stayed with her. Back at her garage, hours later, Sarah peeled off her soaked clothes, her body trembling from exhaustion. She dropped onto the worn-out couch in her office, diesel curling against her side. She told herself it was just another night, just another job. But deep down, she felt it, that something about this was different. Because sometimes the hardest challenges aren't about the machine at all. They're about the choice, to walk away, or to give everything you've got, even when there's nothing in it for you. Sarah had chosen. What she didn't know was that choice had set a story in motion, one that would travel farther than any truck down any highway. And soon, the whole town would hear the echo. The storm passed by dawn, leaving the town washed clean, the streets glistening under a pale sun. Sarah rolled up the bay doors of her shop, her muscles sore from the night before, but her spirit strangely lighter. She'd done something good, something that mattered. But by noon, that fragile sense of pride would be ripped apart in front of half the town. It started with a phone call from Mr. Jacobs, the farmer whose truck she'd promised to finish. He sounded flustered. Sarah, I might need to pick my truck up later. Kyle Knox came by this morning. Said he could get it done faster, cheaper, with better warranty. I didn't know what to say. He made it sound like maybe I'd be better off. Sarah gripped the phone tighter. Mr. Jacobs, your truck's already fixed. It's running fine. You don't owe me a thing but the bill we agreed on. Silence. Then a sigh. I know, Sarah. You've always done good work. But if folks talk, they say Knox Auto's the future, and I can't afford to get left behind. The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone, her stomach twisting. By late afternoon, the humiliation took a public stage. Sarah had been invited to the harvest fair at the town square. A yearly tradition, tractors lined up, kids riding ponies, pie contests, and a stage for announcements. Local businesses often showcased their work. She usually just showed up quietly, chatted with old customers, maybe handed out business cards she printed herself. But this year, Kyle Knox had turned it into a spectacle. When Sarah arrived, she saw it immediately. A gleaming display of trucks and SUVs polished to mirror shine, banners snapping in the breeze. Knox Auto, the future of performance. Loudspeakers blasted upbeat music. A crowd gathered around Kyle, who wore his embroidered shirt like armor. Sarah tried to melt into the background, but she didn't stay hidden for long. Kyle spotted her near the pie stall and raised his voice, drawing attention like a circus ringmaster. "Well, well, folks, look who decided to join us, the town's other mechanic." Heads turned. Sarah felt the heat crawl up her neck, but she lifted her chin. Kyle grinned wide. "Tell me, Sarah, did you bring your duct tape and chewing gum? Or just a bucket for the oil leaks?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Ain't right." Another whispered, "She's tough, but he's not wrong about her place being old." Sarah forced a smile. "I came to celebrate the fair, same as everyone. Don't make this about me, Kyle." But he wasn't done. He stepped onto the stage with a microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. "Folks, let's be honest. Times have changed. You wouldn't trust your harvest to rusty old tractors. You want new. You wouldn't trust your health to back alley doctors. You want professionals. And you sure wouldn't trust your livelihood to a one-woman garage barely holding together." The words landed like stones. Sarah's stomach dropped as people shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking between her and the man with the mic. Kyle leaned forward, milking the moment. "Ask yourselves this. If your truck broke down tonight on a long haul, who would you trust? Some back-road grease monkey with a toolbox from the pawn shop, or a team of certified technicians with the latest technology?" The crowd chuckled, clapped. A few even cheered. Sarah stood rooted, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear. Diesel, her shop cat, had followed her into town and rubbed against her ankle now, as if to ground her. She reached down, scratching his torn ear with shaking fingers. She wanted to shout, to defend herself, to remind everyone of the engines she'd brought back to life, the nights she'd worked till her knuckles bled. But standing there in front of so many faces, neighbors, old customers, even kids she'd seen grow up, her throat locked. Kyle, sensing victory, delivered his final jab. "Don't get me wrong, Sarah. You've got heart. But heart doesn't keep engines running. Skill does. Investment does. And that's why Knox Auto is the future. Not whatever this is." He waved at her like she was just a smudge on his spotless showroom. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was enough. Enough to sting. Enough to hollow her out. Sarah turned and walked away, Diesel trotting behind her. She made it back to her truck before the tears came, hot and unwanted. She gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Humiliation doesn't kill you," she told herself, "but it sure feels like it does." And as she drove back to her little garage, the laughter still echoing in her head, Sarah didn't know if she'd ever stand tall again. But storms, she was about to learn, don't just bring destruction. Sometimes they clear the ground for something unexpected to grow. The next morning, Sarah opened her garage like she always did, rolling up the bay door, setting her coffee mug on the fender of a half-repaired pickup, and listening to the world wake up. But the air felt heavier. Yesterday's humiliation lingered like smoke. Kyle's words echoed in her chest. Not cut out for this business. A joke. She stared at her tools, at the grease-stained floor, at the crooked sign outside her shop. For a long minute, she wondered if he was right. Maybe she was just clinging to something too small, too fragile to survive. But then she heard it. The familiar cough of an old engine turning over wrong, sputtering, gasping for life. Mr. Jacobs's truck was back in her lot. He hadn't gone to Knox Auto after all. Sarah squared her shoulders, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and grabbed her toolbox. "All right, old girl," she whispered to the engine. Let's show them what we're made of. The work became her refuge. She pulled parts out one by one, laying them on the bench in neat rows. Each piece carried its own story. A stripped bolt, a cracked gasket, a bearing that had seen too many winters. She worked slow but steady, sweat dripping down her temples despite the morning chill. Her hands moved on instinct, guided by years of trial, error, and memory. She remembered her father's voice, calm and steady as he worked beside her as a child. Listen to the engine. It'll tell you what's wrong if you've got the patience to hear it. When the replacement gasket didn't fit, she improvised, cutting a new one out of scrap rubber with her pocket knife. When the rusted clamp snapped in two, she scavenged an old one from a forgotten pile of parts. When the socket slipped and skinned her knuckles raw, she wrapped them in shop rags and kept going. Every challenge became fuel. Every setback became defiance. By afternoon, Hollis, the retired welder, stopped by with his slow shuffle and watchful eyes. He leaned against the doorway, chewing on a toothpick. "Heard about the fair yesterday," he said quietly. Sarah didn't look up. Everybody heard. "Don't let that boy's mouth run your future. Man like that never turned a wrench in his life. You fixed more engines with spit and prayer than he's even touched." Sarah smirked faintly, tightening a bolt. "Doesn't feel like it matters much." Hollis stepped closer, his weathered hand brushing over the fender. "Matters to the men whose trucks keep their families fed. Matters to folks who can't afford chrome showrooms and shiny espresso machines. You've got something he'll never buy. Trust. Don't throw it away." His words sank deep, settling in the cracks Kyle had left behind. That night, long after the sun dipped behind the silos, Sarah was still at it. The shop light cast long shadows, glinting off greasy wrenches. Diesel curled up on the toolbox, purring like an idling engine. She wrestled with the final piece, the fuel pump, stubborn and rusted, refusing to seat right. Her arms trembled, her shirt stuck to her skin with sweat, and her patience wore thin. She slammed the wrench down, the clang echoing through the empty shop. "Why won't you just work?" she shouted, voice breaking. Silence answered. She sat back on the floor, breathing hard, staring at the open hood like it was mocking her. But then, like a whisper, she remembered that trucker in the storm. The way he'd looked at her when the engine roared back to life. The way he'd said, "I won't forget this." Something lit inside her. Not pride, not anger, determination. She stood, wiped the sweat from her face, and set her jaw. "No, we're finishing this." With renewed focus, she loosened the bolts again, adjusted the seat, and coaxed the pump into place with gentle, precise taps. It slid in like it had been waiting for her all along. When she tightened the last bolt, she didn't feel exhausted anymore. She felt steady. As midnight approached, Sarah turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, then settled into a low, steady rumble. The sound filled the garage, warm and strong, like a heartbeat. She leaned against the fender, tears stinging her eyes. Not from weakness, but from release. From proof. Diesel jumped down, weaving between her legs as if celebrating with her. Sarah whispered, "We're still here." And for the first time in weeks, she believed it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have guessed, was that this victory was just the prelude, because soon something far greater than an engine would roar to life in her little garage. 3 weeks passed. The whispers from the harvest fair faded to background noise, replaced by the steady rhythm of work. Sarah kept her head down, kept the bays open, kept surviving. The morning the turning point arrived, the sky was scrubbed clean and cold, the kind of blue that made chrome look brighter. She heard it before she saw it, the diesel grumble of a flatbed easing down the road. It rolled into her gravel lot and settled with a sigh of brakes. On the deck sat a long, low shape under a canvas tarp, and strapped beside it, 2 heavy wooden crates stenciled with shipping marks. The driver hopped down, a square-shouldered woman with a clipboard and a knowing smile. "Delivery for Sarah Whitaker," she said. "Special instructions." Sarah stepped out, wiping her hands on a rag. "From who?" The driver pointed to the envelope taped to a crate. The paper was thick, the handwriting careful. Sarah slid a finger under the flap. Sarah, you helped a stranger in the rain when you didn't have to. You didn't ask who he was or what he could pay. I was that stranger. My name is Ethan Cole. Most folks know me as the man behind Cole Interstate Freight. I started with one truck and a toolbox, same as you. Under that tarp is the first truck I ever owned, a 1987 Kenworth W900, old blue. She blew a head gasket and sat ever since. I've tried to bring her back 3 times. No one's had the patience. I think you do. If you can make her breathe again, the rest is yours to keep. What's in the crates and what comes after? Either way, thank you for that night by the ditch. You reminded me of my beginnings. Ethan Sarah stared at the signature, her heart thudding. Cole Interstate Freight wasn't just some local outfit. Their trucks crossed half the country. She folded the letter slowly, afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too fast. The driver swung her arm toward the tarp. You want the grand reveal? They pulled the canvas back. The sun splashed across a long hood, faded navy paint, twin stacks dull with neglect. The emblems were pitted, the grill a little crooked, but the bones were pure. Old Blue was tired, not broken. Sarah ran a hand over the fender, feeling the story in the metal. Miles, winters, stubbornness. She touched the valve cover like a pulse. What's in the crates? She asked. Parts, the driver said, tapping each. Top-shelf gaskets, hoses, injectors, a rebuilt turbo, and toys. Sarah pried the lid off the second crate and actually laughed. Inside sat a brand-new heavy-duty scan tool still in foam, a precision torque wrench set, and a rolling cart that gleamed like a mirror. Tucked in the corner, a small brass plate. For Sarah's diesel and repair, from one road to another. By the time Hollis shuffled in, Sarah had the big Kenworth half in Bay 1. He whistled low. Mercy, he said. That's a lot of truck. It's a promise, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Let's keep it. They got to work. Off came the valve covers. Out came the injectors. Hollis cleaned and lapped until his fingers blackened. Sarah ran her hands through the harness, traced each line, each connector, each clue. The old head gasket had blown, and then sat long enough for corrosion to creep where it didn't belong. The cooling passages were furred. The turbo spun lazy and resentful. But nothing was fatal. Word spread faster than oil on concrete. A couple of farmers paused at the bay door. A kid on a bike stopped and just stared at the old Kenworth like it was a dinosaur waking up. Even Mr. Jacobs wandered over, hat in hand, sheepish but grinning. He carried a sack from the diner. Mrs. Alvarez sent food, he said. Said heroes don't cook. Sarah rolled her eyes, but the warmth in her chest didn't argue. By late afternoon, the inevitable black pickup idled at the edge of the lot. Kyle leaned on his door, sunglasses reflecting the bay like a cheap mirror. You moving into antique restoration now? He called. Careful, those old girls don't like rough hands. Sarah didn't look up. Hollis answered without turning. Then good thing she's got careful ones. Kyle smirked. When you're done burning daylight, let me know. Knox could haul that shell up the hill and give it a graceful end. Drive on, son, Hollis said, calm as rain. Kyle lingered long enough to be seen, then peeled away with a bark of exhaust. Sarah felt the familiar twist in her gut, and then it passed. The truck in front of her mattered more than the boy behind the wheel. Evening fell. The shop lights threw warm cones across Old Blue's block. Sarah cleaned the mating surfaces until they shone, seated the new head gasket like a blessing, torqued the head bolts in sequence, voice a whisper counting along. She replaced the injectors, swapped the turbo, cleaned the intercooler, and chased threads until the bolts spun true. Hollis bled the fuel lines with the patience of a priest. The scan tool blinked to life on the rolling cart. Technology in service of something older. Listening. They primed the system. Diesel the cat curled on the stool like a foreman, one ear flicking at each click and hiss. Sarah's hands trembled a little when she climbed into the cab. She looked through the dusty windshield at her crooked sign and smiled despite herself. "Ready?" she called. Hollis lifted a thumb. A few neighbors had drifted close, small-town gravity pulling them toward the promise of a first breath. Mr. Jacobs took his hat off like a man walking into church. Sarah turned the key. The starter groaned. The engine rolled, coughed, then stumbled. She paused, adjusted fuel pressure, tried again. Roll, cough, cough. "Come on," she whispered. "Tell me what you need." She cracked the throttle, feathered it, and listened like her father had taught her. The third attempt caught, just a lick of fire, and then died. She exhaled slowly, set her jaw, and made a tiny change to timing. One more try. The fourth turn was different. The engine thumped, hesitated, then surged, a rough baritone that shook the wrenches on the pegboard. Smoke bloomed from the stacks, and then cleared, the idle evening out into a rich, steady rumble that filled the little cinderblock world with sound. Old Blue was back, alive, proud. The neighbors whooped. Hollis laughed, head tipped back like a boy again. Mr. Jacobs clapped so hard his hat fell. Sarah rested her forehead on the wheel for a beat, eyes hot, relief crashing over her like that storm weeks ago. She jumped down, hand on the fender, feeling the vibration in her bones. "If you believe experience always beats arrogance," she said to no one and everyone, breathless and grinning, "give this video a like." A black SUV eased to the curb. The rear door opened, and a tall man with a beard streaked in gray stepped out, his eyes bright with something like pride. Sarah knew that voice from a rain-slashed ditch. "Hi, Sarah," Ethan Cole said. "Mind if I make this official?" The crowd turned. Kyle's pickup crept back to the edge of the lot, engine idling. He watched from the shadows. Ethan held out another envelope. "Tomorrow's the harvest convoy. I'd be honored if Old Blue led it. And if you're willing," he lifted his voice so it carried, "I'd like to tell this town who got him there, and what comes next." Sarah looked at the Kenworth, at Hollis, at the neighbors who had drifted into her circle of light. She took the envelope with grease-stained fingers. "Let's do it," she said. Out by the road, Kyle's hazard lights flicked twice like a warning, then went dark. Morning broke over Main Street with a brass band shine. The harvest convoy lined up bumper to bumper. Grain haulers polished like trophies, dump trucks with bunting, a few stubborn tractors flying flags, and, at the front, a navy hood long as a promise. Old Blue idled like a contented bull, smoke clean, stacks breathing even. Sarah ran a palm across the fender one last time, feeling the steady thrum answer her touch. Ethan Cole stood on the courthouse steps in a windbreaker, the town seal snapping on a banner behind him. People packed the square, farmers, school kids, diner waitresses with flour on their aprons. Even folks who never cared about engines leaned in, pulled by the story humming in the air. Ethan raised the mic. "Most of you know me as the guy whose trucks pass through at 2 a.m. and bring your feed, steel, and mail. I started with one rig and a dream. That rig," he pointed, "is Old Blue. He died on me years back. 3 shops failed him. Then a storm night changed everything. A mechanic I'd never met, working alone on a roadside in the rain. Got my current driver home without charging a dime. She didn't know my name. She just did the right thing." A murmur rippled. Sarah swallowed, heat climbing her cheeks. Ethan smiled toward her. "That mechanic is Sarah Whitaker." Applause sparked and then built into something with weight, neighbors clapping like their hands could lift a person up. Hollis whistled through his teeth. Mrs. Alvarez dabbed her eyes with a napkin. "Yesterday," Ethan continued, "I dropped Old Blue at Sarah's shop. Last night that engine woke from the dead. Today he leads this convoy, and I'm proud to announce Cole Interstate Freight is naming Sarah's Diesel and Repair our designated regional service partner. Tools, training credits, parts accounts, funded. Every coal truck within 100 miles will know that crooked S on her sign and pull in when they're in trouble." The cheer hit like summer thunder. Sarah's lungs forgot their job for a second. Her shop, funded, partnered. She felt light, dazed, like a boxer who suddenly realizes the bell's for him. A black pickup, edged the curb. Kyle Knox leaned an elbow on his window, smile thin. He killed the engine and sauntered forward, slow clap cutting through the applause. "That's a pretty speech, Mr. Cole," he said, voice amplified by nothing but audacity. "But talk is cheap. Anyone can make an old motor cough for a day. Question is, did she actually fix it, or just dress it up for a parade?" The square went quiet, in that way crowds do when drama promises a front row seat. Ethan handed Kyle the mic without blinking. It was either confidence or a bet on the truth. Kyle tipped his chin at Sarah. "Let's test your miracle. Cold restart after a full shutdown, then idle stability, then a pull test up Silo Hill with 3 hay wagons chained. If your antique doesn't stumble, I'll make a donation to the school auto shop in your name." He grinned. "If it does, folks will remember who runs a real shop." Sarah's heart stuttered, not from doubt in the Kenworth, but from the trap. Even a healthy engine can hiccup under spectacle. She met Ethan's eye. He gave a small nod that said, "You decide." She looked past Kyle to the crowd. Mr. Jacobs with his hat crushed in 2 hands, the diner kids on the curb, Diesel prowling like he owned the street. She lifted the mic, voice steady. "Start it, hook it, run it." A hum went through the square. 3 wagons clattered into place behind Old Blue. Chains rang as volunteers hitched iron to iron. Hollis checked the links like a man blessing a ship. Sarah climbed into the cab. Her fingertips trembled on the key, then calmed. Breath in. She twisted. The starter caught, rolled. Old Blue fired on the first beat, settling into that velvet-heavy idle that feels like a handshake from a strong man who means it. The square exhaled. Sarah watched the oil pressure hold. Temp steady, idle smooth enough to keep a coin upright on the dash. She placed a quarter. It didn't dance. "Idle stable?" Ethan called, grinning. "Lucky coin," Kyle shot back, but he'd lost a notch of swagger. Sarah slipped the Kenworth into gear. The convoy parted like a river for a prow. She eased forward, chain links tensioning, wagons complaining. The grade of Silo Hill waited at the edge of town, long, steep, the place where kids dared each other to sled in winter. Spectators flowed along the sidewalk, phones up, the day turning into a folklore seed. At the base, Sarah rolled to a stop, foot firm on the brake. The weight behind her felt like history hooking itself to her bumper. She glanced in the mirror. Hollis raised 2 fingers. Ready. Ethan stood beside Kyle now, hands in pockets, expression easy as a man who's seen work up close. Sarah set her jaw. "All right, old man," she whispered to the truck. "Let's climb." She feathered the throttle, found the pull, listened. The engine answered with a deepening note that filled the hill. Clutch in, engage. No shudder, no cough. The whole train surged and moved. Gravel spit. The crowd climbed with them, laughter and shouts popping like corn. Halfway up, she eased a hair more fuel. Boost came on clean. Temps held. She could feel Kyle's stare like heat on the back of her neck. She felt something else, too. Her father's voice, low and proud, riding shotgun. Near the crest, a crosswind shoved. 1 wagon bucked, chain chimed. Sarah corrected with a calm wrist, not a flinch. The engine didn't falter. Old Blue crested the hill, as if it had never been anything but alive. She eased to the flat, set the brake, and let the idle purr for the town to hear. Silence fell, a heartbeat where everyone measured what they'd just seen. Then the sound came, not just clapping but a roar, the kind of cheer that makes a person taller. Mr. Jacobs whooped. The diner kids waved napkins like flags. Hollis laughed until he wiped his eyes with a sleeve. Diesel, how he got up that hill only cats know, wound between Sarah's boots when she climbed down, tail high like a banner. Ethan took the mic back. "Donation, was it?" Kyle's smile curdled. He fished for bravado and found a receipt book. "To the school," he muttered, scribbling with a tight jaw. "In her name. And something else," Ethan added, voice gentle but carrying. "Every business has a moment to decide what it stands for. Today we saw the difference between shine and substance. If this town values substance, craft, grit, A hand that doesn't quit. Say so. The answer rolled off the hill in waves. Applause, whistles, a stomp on truck steps that shook the road. Sarah felt the sound pour into the empty places Kyle's words had carved, filling them to the brim. She held the mic, breath-catching. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong? Like your work wasn't good enough because you didn't fit someone's picture? Her voice warmed, strengthened. Tell me your story in the comments. Today, we write a new one. Ethan lifted a small brass plate from his pocket and pressed it into Sarah's palm. Preferred partner, Coal Interstate Freight. She closed her fingers around it like a vow. Kyle slid backward through the crowd, sunglasses on through the truth didn't cast shade. His engine barked, then dwindled down Main, smaller than it had ever sounded. Back at the courthouse steps, the mayor shook Sarah's hand, cameras flashing, papers scribbling. Bookings stacked themselves without asking. 3 independents, a feed mill Peterbilt, 2 farm service rigs. The crooked S on her sign, suddenly, looked less like a flaw and more like a signature. When the brass band struck up, Ethan leaned near. There's one more thing, he said. But I'd rather tell you at your shop. It's not about trucks. Sarah blinked. What is it about? Legacy, he said. The word hit her like a fresh wind. And for all the cheers and the brass and the glow, a new question opened. Wide, bright, a little terrifying. The convoy wound down, engines cooling, laughter fading into the autumn evening. Sarah stood in her gravel lot again, the crooked S on her sign catching the last orange light. Old Blue sat quiet in Bay 1, polished by pride more than rags, its hood still warm. Hollis had gone home whistling. Diesel was asleep on the toolbox, and the town's applause still echoed in her bones. Ethan Cole leaned against the fender, arms crossed, gaze thoughtful. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just listened to the tick of metal cooling, the cicadas starting up in the hedgerow. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. Sarah, he said, his voice softer now than in front of the crowd. I told you I started with 1 truck and a toolbox, but I didn't tell you who gave me that toolbox. My father, rail worker, hands like stone. He believed in me when no one else did. When I lost him, I promised myself I'd pass that belief forward. He opened the folder. Inside were contracts, legal and clean. I don't just want you as a service partner. I want you as a shareholder. 10% of Coal Interstate's regional branch. This isn't charity, it's legacy. You earned it in the rain. Sarah stared at the papers, her throat tight. 10%. A stake in something bigger than her wildest sketch of the future. Her first thought was disbelief. Me? Her second was her father's voice, patient and steady. Treat the machine right, and it'll carry you farther than you think. Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. Why me? Ethan smiled. Because when I broke down, you didn't ask who I was. You just helped. The world needs more of that. For once, Sarah had no comeback. Only a quiet nod. A tear slipping hot down her cheek she didn't bother to wipe. That night, she walked the quiet garage alone. The tools gleamed in their drawers, the new scan tool screen glowing softly. The crooked sign outside caught the street lamp, stubborn, imperfect, hers. She thought about every slight, every laugh at the fair, every time someone asked, "Is the mechanic here?" and looked past her. She thought about the storm night, her hands raw in the rain, the trucker's tired eyes. And she thought about the hill, the wagons pulling steady behind Old Blue, the crowd's roar lifting her chest. Redemption hadn't come as revenge. It had come as recognition, hard-earned, tested, undeniable. She whispered into the dim garage, as if her father might still be listening. We did it. We're still here. Diesel yawned and stretched, as if to agree. Sarah's story wasn't about engines, not really. It was about dignity, about standing tall when the world tried to make you small, about finding out that experience, grit and heart weigh more than chrome and swagger. And maybe you've felt that too. Maybe someone's laughed at your work, dismissed your effort, told you weren't enough. If you've ever stood in those shoes, you know how Sarah felt. Write it in the comments. because your story matters too. If you believe heart and hard work still beat arrogance and shine, give this video a like. Stories like this deserve to be shared, not buried. And if you want to hear more tales of dignity, struggle, and redemption, subscribe and join me for the next one. Because somewhere out there, another humble hero is waiting for their story to be told. Sarah shut off the lights, locked the garage, and stood under the stars for a long minute. The town was quiet, but she didn't feel small anymore. She felt steady, rooted. Old Blue rested behind her, alive again. Ethan's folder was under her arm, heavy with promise. The crooked S on her sign glowed faintly in the dark. Tomorrow would bring more engines, more busted bolts, more nights with grease under her nails. But tomorrow would also bring new beginnings. A seat at a bigger table, a legacy carried forward. For now, that was enough. Sarah smiled into the night, and the story of the woman who fixed a stranger's truck for free had only just begun.